So it only makes sense to make this mandatory. But a lot of people, they hear mandatory and then immediately don't like it. Well, think about the other side of it. Are you willing to lose your house, your car, your other possessions, just because you don't like a government plan? Think about that for a moment. And I don't think many people want to lose everything that they have worked for or are working to hold on to just because their pride is more important than a law. But that's just me. Shutting down the government, though, is expected to cost the federal government well over $2 billion if it resembles the last shutdowns that we had 17 years ago. Though the economy could be harmed in additional ways that are nearly impossible to measure at this point. As a matter of fact, the Office of Management and Budget estimated that 2 government shutdowns in 95 and 96 totaling 27 days cost the federal government $1.4 billion. And that was 17 years ago. That's over $2 billion in today's dollars on costs like back pay to furloughed federal workers and uncollected fines and taxes. Now, you bet your ass that the government's going to collect on those back taxes. And right now, they're not collecting it. And there's no guarantee that they're going to pay furloughed workers, even though they should. They should be being paid right now. That's another aspect of this that irritates me, is that innocent government workers are being penalized by a bunch of basically extremely rich people in power who have protected their own interest, who are supposed to be representing common folk like you and me. And it's time to change that. It's time to change how they are paid, and perhaps even how much they are compensated for. I have no love for term limits, but I think it's time to consider it for our members in the House and Senate. I mean, we require it of the President. I think the majority of states now require it of their governors. I know that's the case here in Missouri. So maybe it's time we ought to consider term limits for members of Congress and the Senate. The reason why I have been historically opposed to that idea, because I thought that it would weaken our government. But I don't think our government is very strong now with career politicians. And that's not to say it's going to stop someone from going, his term limits have expired in the House and they switch over to the Senate. I don't begrudge him running for that office or another higher office like the presidency. But the current system clearly does not work. So why are we allowing a system to pay people to shut us down, making us vulnerable, and wrecking our economy when they're still getting compensated? That's like staying out of the cookie jar, but here, I'll guard the cookie jar. You can't have any. And that's what we're seeing here. That's what's happening. Well, the $2 billion doesn't even begin to account for intangible losses in worker morale and productivity and confidence in the federal government. Federal confidence in the federal government has been dwindling for years, and it's gotten a lot worse since President Obama got into office, largely out of public misperceptions, things like the birther movement. To me, that's a bunch of nonsense. That's just my opinion. But I have not seen any tangible evidence to support the theory that our president was born in Africa. And if you feel that way, I'm sorry, but I just don't agree with that. I think it's a naive position to hold on to. But nevertheless, every time the president's popularity goes up, whether on a positive or negative level, like we have seen over the past week, really, since the Syrian crisis, mentions of the birther movement, I've noticed have picked back up again, especially this past week. Well, Doug Eakin, former director of the Congressional Budget Office, said a short-term shutdown will have a fairly small economic impact. Now, the federal government spends roughly $3 billion a day $3 billion a day in discretionary spending. So a disruption like the ones we had in 95 and 96 could wind up being roughly equivalent to the costing of keeping the federal government running for a day. But I have a feeling it's going to be a lot higher than that. We're in day 3 and there's no sign that either side is willing to negotiate. And I fault both the Republicans and the Democrats for not saying, okay, here's what we're willing to give up. What are you willing to give up? Let's make this work. Both sides can't have it their own way and not expect to compromise, to give up something. This is a marriage. And right now the marriage between the Democrats and the Republicans in this country is on the verge of destroying everything that we have worked for, everything that means of any value. And I think a lot of people are seeing that, but a lot of the partisan bickering that I'm seeing on the internet and on Facebook, and I admit I'm as guilty as charged. I have my positions, and there are some things that I will not back off on. But if we're not willing to compromise, if our leaders aren't willing to compromise, America is going to go under, and it's going to go under very fast. I'm not saying this to be a scare tactic, but that is the fact of life. Now I realize that in time all empires fail. But I don't want to see America fail. I want to see America continue on long after I'm dead. I want to know that everything that I have fought for in my own way is going to continue. Now, there are people that feel that Obamacare is socialism. Perhaps it is in a certain sense. But it doesn't make sense to destroy the economic dreams that so many people have out of the fear of something that, of an economic principle that a lot of people are just throwing around and not even fully realizing or understanding what socialism is. You know, if we're in a socialist country, then don't we all own everything to a certain level, or our government does? Well, getting back to this opinion piece that I found, there's some distraction costs that never go away, and they're real. Among those distractions is the amount of time federal managers and human resource employees must spend preparing the shutdowns. Prior to the 1980s, many agencies would simply continue running if there was a funding gap. Well, that changed with a legal memo from Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti saying government work had to stop, with the exception of certain employees. That's when those agencies had to start writing plans for a government shutdown. Not a full-time job, but additional responsibilities on top of the regular work. That's according to Joe Cooney, a former Office of Management Budget attorney who helped develop these plans. They'd have to put aside whatever other functions they had because this one is an absolute deadline, he said. These plans went largely untouched between 95 and 96 during that government shutdown, and the one that nearly took place 2 years ago. The good news is, there is some good news in all of this, is that some of the planning work that will have gone into the shutdown was done 2 years ago and is still relevant. However, a short shutdown of a few days will have a smaller effect, then a larger one will have bigger effects. So the longer this prolongs, the worse it gets. It's like a disease that's not getting treated. 800,000 people, roughly, are not getting paychecks. The proximity of a fight over the U.S. debt ceiling borrowing authority will run out on October 17th. So there's another deadline we've got to contend with. October 17th, that's 2 weeks from today, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, 2 weeks from today. According to the Treasury Department, which could exacerbate the market's reaction to a shutdown as financial institutions lose confidence in the federal government. Now, in the past, the effects have been largely limited compared to more recent times. Bank of America Merrill Lynch research showed that the median change for the S&P 500 is a gain of 0.1% in the last 11 cases of a federal shutdown. That is followed by a median increase of nearly 3% in the following month. But the threat of a default tends to scare the markets even more. Let's see, the markets all posted a loss at the end of the day a couple of days ago. That's another area where the shutdown will cost money, is in contract spending, which has exploded in recent years and remains well over $500 billion a year, even as the Obama administration has taken steps to curb it. Though employees of firms that contract with the federal government won't be furloughed the same way that federal employees are, there will be employees on standby who receive their salaries even as contracts are temporarily placed on hold. And those contractors will ultimately get paid or get an equitable adjustment when the shutdown ends. That's according to former Representative Tom Davis, Republican from Virginia, who is now the Director of Federal Government Affairs for Deloitte. Like federal government managers, contracting officers have already lost work time, going through all of their contracts to figure out which ones will be affected by shutdown and how they'll keep things running. You're paying for the staff that is not getting done. Or rather, you're paying for the stuff that's not getting done. On top of that, the morale cost on this federal workers and contractors is huge. So, one other interesting note, and this really has nothing to do with the shutdown per se, but an interesting observation. Remember Monica Gate, when that broke? I believe it was 97, 98, thereabouts. Yeah. Well, the relationship between President Bill Clinton and his intern Monica Lewinsky began during the November 95 shutdown. Now, I'm not saying President Barack Obama will have an affair with an intern. I don't think he's the type. Boy, that would really get the Christian conservatives riled up, wouldn't it? But interesting little side note there to think about. All right. Well, let's see here. What else do I want to talk about? One more thing. In politics, of course, there are some problems that become so stigmatized that we lose sight of the core of the issue. The Affordable Care Act is a prime example. It's been called Obamacare so much in parts of the country that a lot of people think that it's its own plan. Well, I'm going to state for the record, there's no such thing as Obamacare. It's the Affordable Care Act. Okay? Whether you like it or not, let's stop calling it Obamacare. I'm sick to death of hearing that term. It's unflattering, it's inaccurate, and it's misleading. And for anyone to use it on a regular basis is distracting from the argument. If you don't like the Affordable Care Act, start calling it the Affordable Care Act, please. Okay? Well, the bitterly contested issue of this of the so-called mandate, and it is a mandate, and I don't like that. I admit I don't like that, but I understand why it's mandated, is that every individual carries some form of health insurance is the hot topic at hand. In fact, it's so hot. How hot was it, Joe? That last night, an effort to abolish or delay the mandate for another year led to the first federal government shutdown in 17 years. This article is written on Tuesday. But those who call the law socialism and who denounce liberal federal government programs are failing to see an important point here. Okay? Now, this is where I'm getting political. And if you don't like it, well, you're welcome to hit the delete button. But I want you to hear me out. Okay? I've heard of numerous conservatives and anti-Obama people in recent months and years say, defend this. Well, I'm defending it. In this particular case, the case of America's health care reform, alternate options are not really of material difference, at least not specifically for this piece of the law. Now, we're in a nation of more than 316 million people. An estimated 48 million residents are currently uninsured. 48 million. That's a big number. Now, this is based on numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, if one of these uninsured has an accident, the rest of us end up having to pay for it through inflated medical costs and insurance premiums. For the lack of better words, the system of healthcare payment that is on its way out is one of welfare by the visit.